NYC is supported by Veteran Movers NYC, a New York City moving service founded in 2011 by a former Marine and organized by veterans of the armed forces. More information at veteranmoversnyc.com. The American Crafts Festival outdoors at Lincoln Center this weekend and June 11th and 12th with 380 fine craft displays, demonstrations, entertainment, food, and more. Noon to 9 Saturday and 10 to 7 Sunday, 64th Street and Columbus Avenue. TV presenting Science Goes to the Movies, made possible by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. This week, physicist David E. Kaplan discusses filmmakers' views of physics. Premiere 7:30 p.m. Friday. More at cuny.tv. Support for The Green Space, WNYC's street-level, state-of-the-art events venue and broadcast studio at 160 Barrack Street, is provided by the Jerome L. Green Foundation.
This is WNYC FM HDNA New York, WNJT FM 88.1 Trenton, WNJP 88.5 Sussex, WNJY 89.3 Netcong, and WNJO 90.3 Toms River. We're in New York and New Jersey Public Radio at 10:58. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. Now we continue our 30 Issues election series. It's issue 8 this week, infrastructure as an issue in the general election and the New Jersey primary. Infrastructure is such a big issue in New Jersey, post-Sandy recovery and resiliency, infrastructure, the dwindling Transportation Trust Fund at the state level, and much more. We remember that Governor Christie in his first term stopped an NJ Transit tunnel to Manhattan, the one known as the ARC Tunnel, from being completed because of fear of cost overruns, and New Jersey saddled with too much of the share of the cost relative to New York or the federal government. But that project has been replaced by a twice as expensive tunnel idea called the Gateway Project that observers consider probably the most important infrastructure project in the United States right now. This time it involves NJ Transit and Amtrak, with the states of New York and New Jersey each contributing a quarter of the cost and Washington contributing half. Here is Governor Cuomo describing the $20 billion Gateway Project.
These tunnels were very serious because all the trains run through them between New York and New Jersey. It's Amtrak for the whole Northeast run through these tunnels, and they're old and they took a terrible beating during Hurricane Sandy. The federal government, Department of Transportation, talked a long time about how important the tunnels were, but it's a $20 billion project and we needed the funding. And there was no funding coming. Governor Christie and I put together a proposal where we said we would pay half as a way to provoke the conversation. And thanks to our representatives in Congress, the federal government now said that they're going to match the half. And I congratulate Senator Schumer for taking the lead on our side and for actually getting the federal government to deliver finally. So it's going to happen. We have to put the funding together, but the funding has been committed. And when you put these tunnels together with everything else we're doing, Marshall, you're seeing a whole reconstruction of the fundamental infrastructure of New York. The MTA, we're doing new subways, we're doing new buses, 2nd Avenue subway, cross Hudson tunnels, LaGuardia, Tappan Zee. That is the infrastructure of New York. And that's government's responsibility. It was stalled for a long, long time, and now it's happening.
Governor Cuomo at the biggest party ever given, apparently. But let's talk about Gateway and LaGuardia Airport, as we just heard the development in that reconstruction, and other infrastructure issues this election year, with Adi Tomer, a Brookings Institution fellow and a member of the Metropolitan Infrastructure Initiative. Hi, Adi. Welcome to WNYC.
Hi, thanks for having me, Brian.
To start on the Gateway Project, did Christie's refusal to build the ARC Tunnel wind up leading to something better and a fairer deal to New Jersey in the bargain?
There's certainly a lot to like about the Gateway Project. I mean, you know, it's not lost on listeners of your program how important that access to, well, the region's core, to play a little bit of pun on the old tunnel project. And it's so important for the entire Northeast corridor and really the global economy. I mean, so much funnels through New York that making sure there's that access to it is vital, not just for Manhattan's economy, but really for those bedroom communities in New Jersey and New York and even out to Connecticut and Pennsylvania, and of course the other anchors in Boston and DC. I think that's part of the reason you saw, frankly, in pretty quick timelines for DC, a large chunk of money that's not from conventional sources come together to support a project of this scale. So I think it shows that it is of national import. It's really hard to backtrack, you know what I mean, in terms of your initial question on is this better or not. We certainly can like where this is going. And obviously Sandy, I think really, Superstorm Sandy really underscored just how vital not only this infrastructure is, but if it goes offline, really what can happen to the regional and macro economies if they're shut down. So we're fortunate that's moving forward, and let's hope it keeps up that momentum.
Cuomo in the clip said we still have to put the funding together, even though the funding has been committed. And I don't understand if that means the money is there or the money isn't there. Do you?
That's one of the hardest things to tell always in infrastructure. So, taking a quick step back, and I think the New Jersey listeners are especially attuned to this right now, is most of our funding, especially for transportation infrastructure of this kind, both nationally and in states, it comes from the gas tax. And if it doesn't, it needs to come from general fund. When it's gas tax money, you know how much is there. Unfortunately, in the case of New Jersey, they're basically fully tapped out on the gas tax, and maybe we'll talk about that at one point. And the federal side, when it comes out of general funds, or same for the other states, it really is about either shifting the debt chairs a little bit relative to other public programs, or finding new revenues from new places. So I think it's going to come up to the two governors to figure out if they want to shift those deck chairs or find new revenue sources. But chances are, if they're saying this commitment publicly and so loudly, frankly, that they'll find the money in the pockets that they have.
And to get you quickly on the other issue in the news, though it's not New Jersey infrastructure per se, Governor Cuomo announcing developments in the reconstruction of LaGuardia Airport today, as you just heard in the newscast. And Richard Hake reminded us that Joe Biden had come to LaGuardia and said it was like something he'd see in the third world. How much of that is federal money?
So a huge chunk of that is actually really not just local money, but it's actually a combination of what insiders in transportation call public-private partnerships, basically private capital coming off the sidelines, helping to build out that infrastructure. One of the things we always try to remind folks, especially in the New York, New Jersey region, is that that's the #1 aviation center, not just for the country, but pretty much the world, competitive with places like London and increasingly other growing markets like Dubai. So much funnels through that market that rebuilding LaGuardia doesn't just help the regional economy; it really helps the macro one. So it's a great project for everyone to really get those benefits from what they're going to do there. It's obviously LaGuardia is in great need. I always personally hesitate to say, look, no one goes to an airport for the aesthetics, right? So I understand when used to live in New York, having a leaky tile in LaGuardia is nothing nice to look at. But in the end of the day, it's also the closest airport to downtown and to Wall Street and to many other places where people live. So it's a very attractive facility. This kind of upgrade is really important to make sure that it maintains that status for decades in the future.
Let's go on to the candidates for president. Here is Bernie Sanders on infrastructure and infrastructure jobs.
What I have proposed is to expend $1 trillion over a 5-year period to make sure that states and cities throughout this country have the resources that they need to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. By the way, $1 trillion may seem like a lot of money, but the American Society of Civil Engineers tells us that we need even more, but it would be a good start. And you know what happens when we invest $1 trillion in rebuilding our roads and bridges and water systems? We're going to create 13 million jobs over a 5-year period.
And here is Hillary Clinton on Charlie Rose in December.
The Republicans don't want to pay for anything. It is. When I was in the Senate, I was on the committee that was responsible for writing the bill, the highway transportation bill. It was hard because we had a lot of back and forth, but we came out with a bill. We got it done. There has not been a bill that has actually come out for years now. And so the Congress is in the middle of arguing about whether or not they can get a highway bill. But they don't want anybody to pay anything for it. And so they don't want to use user fees. They don't want any kind of fee that could be construed as a tax. Okay. Now, at some point, we are crumbling. I mean, every independent assessment says the same thing. We have a failing grade.
So we heard Clinton and Sanders there. We'll get to Trump in a minute. But Edie, the thing that Sanders said at the end of the clip, not only $1 trillion over a 5-year period to make sure that states and cities throughout the country have the resources that they need to rebuild their crumbling infrastructure, but also we're going to create 13 million jobs over a 5-year period. And when we did an the politics of political history of infrastructure on yesterday's show, we heard from FDR forward that jobs and infrastructure keep being linked politically. Do they belong in the same breath, in your opinion, or should they be seen as separate issues?
They're definitely not, it's not an exact correlation in the sense that you spend this much, you're going to get this many jobs. And it's not necessarily the most efficient way to make jobs, but that's in some ways because there's actually a short-sightedness to the kind of jobs we're talking about. So we've been doing some major research here at Brookings for about 3 years now about what really is an infrastructure job. And there's a lot of focus in the narrative. Obviously, Bush famously said this is Bush Sr. When he was president, about this is really a jobs bill, not a highway bill. They were just talking about short-term construction jobs. Those represent less than a quarter of infrastructure jobs in the country. Infrastructure actually represents about 10% of our workforce already, but most of those jobs are actually in operations, in governance, in design. In other words, basically using that system once it's already built. So it's everything from your freight handlers to your architects and civil engineers. So there's an inextricable link there because once the infrastructure exists, people tend to use it. And in terms of it's actually their job to use that system. So it's great for our economy in the long run. It helps connect communities together, whether we're talking about broadband infrastructure to water infrastructure to, of course, roads and rails. So there's no question that all three candidates, because I think Donald Trump deserves credit here for speaking publicly, at least, about the need to invest in infrastructure. So we can expect any candidate that comes through the general in November to have some sort of infrastructure agenda that is going to lead to jobs, but it's not just those hard hat jobs when they build stuff. It's actually the long-term jobs that are really good paying for a lot of people.
Is there any particular difference that you would articulate as, a Brookings infrastructure watcher between Sanders and Clinton? Certainly the thrust of their remarks were the same.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Brian. The energy is in the same direction. Again, Trump is speaking the same way too. So we can feel as the general electorate that we can really see an infrastructure agenda coming. Now, Senator Sanders' agenda is obviously it's a much bigger figure, $1 trillion versus $275 billion from Clinton. I know to everyone those are huge numbers, but relative to the need, they're within the ballpark. But Senator Sanders is not as clear about where the funding exactly is going to come from that. Secretary Clinton so far has talked about bringing back offshore profits and using that method, something that, again, the current presidential team has been talking about for quite a few years too. The big thing to keep in mind here for, I think, the listeners, and again, in the case of New Jersey, next week they're voters, and then everyone's going to be voting in November, is that as much as the president can set the tone here, so much of infrastructure spending at the federal level really comes out of decisions made in Congress. So we can expect the president, whoever comes out, to set that agenda, to be hopefully really clear about what they want to invest in. And there's a lot of different categories where we have need, but it's really going to come up to Congress to move that ball forward from where we are right now.
And that's what Clinton said at the beginning of her clip. The Republicans don't want to pay for anything. When I was in the Senate, I was on the committee that was responsible for writing the highway transportation bill. It was hard because we had a lot of back and forth, but we came out with a bill. And her point is, now they're not. Now, there's certainly been news over the course of the Obama administration that he proposes infrastructure, both for infrastructure's sake and for employment's sake, and the Republicans turn it down. But I see you wrote a piece earlier in the year, a real win for metropolitan areas in 2017 transportation budget. So what do you think the legacy of this divided government under Obama and Republican Congress is on infrastructure?
That's a great question. First, to give Congress credit, especially if you had someone on talking about basically any other major policy area, right? They could really point to congressional gridlock, effectively leading to no results. Infrastructure is not that. We've passed quite a few bills under this administration, and in that sense, they deserve credit. Just this year, in fact, since that Clinton clip that you all ran, they did pass a major multi-year surface transportation program. The acronym is the FAST Act, and it includes major increases in funding for investment in surface transportation. Now, the problem is, and I think where Secretary Clinton's comments still hold water, is that there was a tremendous amount of what many term financial shenanigans to get that increase. In particular, we basically took $50 billion from Federal Reserve accounts, which typically are really off limits from the other side of government. Speaking of the Federal Reserve's independence, and drop that into what we call the Highway Trust Fund. So similar to like New Jersey Transit, New Jersey Trust Fund, that's again going broke. This is the way that we firewall payments for surface transportation. Yeah, we found new money, but we really didn't step up to the plate for long-term sustainable funding, whether it's in the form of gas tax, what we use right now, or anything else. So the bills are moving, but we're still at a little bit of loggerheads on how can we decide that common ground for what sustainable funding sources there are going to be, whether they're purely public monies, working with private capital that also really does want to get involved in infrastructure because of the good long run returns, and how we're going to shape all that relative to this, frankly, really wide swath of needs, whether we're talking driving costs, public transportation, aviation, broadband, water. I mean, there's a lot of categories here that have a lot of very clear physical capital investment needs, and there's only so much money to go around.
And let's talk about water for a second, because the Bernie Sanders Club was from a town hall that he held in Flint, Michigan. And obviously Flint is in the news because of its water infrastructure and some, I guess, attempts at cost savings that the state government there undertook, and we see the horrible results of that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure you're thinking the same thing. I mean, it's really sad. I mean, just thinking about what those families are going through, it's kind of scary, right? And it really brings home just how important water is in our daily lives, how much we really take it for granted. Being in a developed nation to this level like the United States, it's an expectation that you're going to have clean water. Just look what happened in New Jersey since Flint. Looking at the schools, over 10 school districts found lead higher than acceptable lead levels inside the schools. I mean, this isn't even in their homes. So this is really a national problem. It's symptomatic of, frankly, an older system where we need to really figure out how we're going to beef up investment. But one thing to keep in mind here, especially with regards to this presidential conversation we're having, is the federal role in water investment right now is very small. It's really states and localities, and in some places, like let's say Bayonne, New Jersey, where they are working with private sector capital too to get in the game, to make those investments. So it's a willingness to pay at the local level, as well as in, let's say, the case in Michigan, where that's what's really sad in Flint is rates were extremely high, some of the highest water rates in the country. I mean, how could you combine bad water with expensive water? So in that case, it's going to take cases like the state of Michigan and in some targeted elements, federal leadership too, to try to lower those rates and make smart investments. It's, again, back to where I started. When the water is dirty, it really brings home just how vital it is. So I'm confident we're going to come up with a solution here, but it's really going to take all three major levels of government, again, state, local, and federal, to work together to build it.
So even though our minds first go to places like airports and railroad tunnels when people think of infrastructure casually, do we learn from Flint that with infrastructure, as with so many other areas of policy, poor people are more vulnerable to doing things on the cheap, to doing things badly, to being shunted aside in terms of priorities and who gets the benefits of things? And we see that in the infrastructure area like we do in other things.
Yeah, I mean, so much of infrastructure is a willingness to pay, or the resources to pay. So let me give you a few examples. Many folks don't realize that transportation is now the #2 household expense in the United States. Rent, if you will, or your mortgage, that's #1, of course. But it actually costs more to get around than to buy food, to take care of oneself from a healthcare perspective. So it's really expensive. And the vast majority of that's not on, let's say, gas taxes. It's actually on insurance and owning a car and just filling it up with regular gasoline. So, driving itself is really a little bit, there's a financial burden there, right? And many lower income folks can't afford it. When you combine that with the fact that, New Jersey's actually and New York are quite lucky. Most of their major urban markets have pretty good transit service. In other parts of America, transit does not a great job being able to both connect people to where they live to where economic opportunity is. So that's something where they can go for a more affordable option in transit, but it ends up costing them in time and the amount of places they can get to. One other quick example too is I want to stress on broadband, something that both Clinton and Sanders have talked a lot about. We have a 75% of households in America subscribe to broadband. So that means 1 out of 4 actually don't have a subscription. Those splits are really different though, by high income and also frankly high educated households versus the flip side, lower income, less educated. And that really speaks to how people are going to find access economic opportunity, especially in a digital economy moving forward. And so we have to think through on a policy angle, how do we make transportation more affordable? How do we get more people online? And really, that's not just going to be for those lower income households benefit. It's really the entire country has a great opportunity if we can do so.
So when we look at this as a presidential election issue, infrastructure is an inequality issue too. Here's Donald Trump last month on CNBC, a little inscrutable on the topic, at least in this clip. Tell me if you can decode this for us.
I am an infrastructure person. I know about infrastructure. I know how to build. I know how to build quickly and on budget and all of that. We do have to rebuild our infrastructure. And one of the things we should be doing and thinking about doing is buying back debt, really buying back debt, doing a great job with it. But we have to fund in some way the infrastructure.
Donald Trump on CNBC last month. Eddie Tomer, infrastructure analyst with the Brookings Institution with us. And there, dare I say, was Trump being Trump. He started out on sort of a serious topic, endorsing the need to rebuild our infrastructure. But then he goes off and, we're going to restructure our debt, and then that had all the financial people going crazy because he was kind of saying, well, maybe, U.S. Treasury bonds aren't with the full faith and credit of the United States government. But what does he have a policy on infrastructure? It does not appear on the issues pages of his website.
Yeah, I was being really nice earlier, basically saying, yes, and you obviously ran the clip, Donald Trump has said infrastructure constantly during this campaign, actually. I mean, if one wants to be especially liberal with the definition of infrastructure, I mean, the wall that he's proposing with our southern neighbor could count as infrastructure.
That's the infrastructure that he obviously prioritizes.
Yes, it seems like it. Look, I work with a ton of great political scientists here at the Brookings Institution. They'd probably be better to comment on how to decode Donald Trump. It's a very difficult topic, and it's a lot of burden on the voters all across the country to do that. How much we can know how much he supports this, it's tough to say. I will say this, though, from especially the industry that he's come up in. There are typically, especially at the local level, when you see this happen, play out in real time, typically the real estate industry are some of the biggest supporters of more infrastructure investment. You also see, frankly, the business community, typified by the Chamber of Commerce here at the national level, but also in their state and local chapters. Huge supporter of more investment in infrastructure. In fact, it's one of the only areas where the U.S. Chamber supports higher taxation, in this case through higher gas taxes, but also other forms of getting capital off the sideline. So I really do believe that we can take Mr. Trump at his word that he supports infrastructure and would like to see us build more of that. But until we see more specifics, it's going to be really difficult to know what his agenda is there. And as I pointed out earlier, again, at the national level, Congress controls so much of it. So if the president isn't really clear, any president, on where they want to go, it really does leave all of the action to their peers on Capitol Hill.
You just told me something I don't know. I didn't know, which is interesting. That the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is the business lobby, basically, and almost never wants higher taxation, does accept higher taxation in pursuit of infrastructure?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you should have the U.S. Chamber folks. They have a great team over there, at least here in D.C., that we know personally, that supports this. Now, look, there's a lot of caveats, as your comment kind of points out, right? If you're going to have higher taxes from that community, they want to really know what they're getting for it. But I think the best way I can typify it is all across the country. You see this a little bit less in the region where we're talking from today, but more so, especially out west and in the mountains. where ballot referenda, basically voters directly going to the polls to vote, do we want to hire typically sales tax to pay for infrastructure? And that's the biggest trend across the country, and where new infrastructure dollars are coming from, especially public. And it's building up massive new transit systems in places from Seattle to Denver to Los Angeles, and of course other markets even out east, like let's say Charlotte, North Carolina. Typically in those markets, you see the state and local chambers in support of those ballot referenda, because basically they see it as a competitiveness issue. Right?
You know what that reminds me of? That moment in the 2012 campaign, and we talked about talked a little about this on yesterday's show, when Obama said to businesses, "You didn't build that," and Romney and so many business people took offense. He was talking about infrastructure. He meant you didn't build your business in a vacuum. And he referred to roads and bridges and other kinds of infrastructure as public works that support the creation of business, so that people should support government and the work of government and taxation in pursuit of the work of government. So that was actually an issue that kind of got all mussed up in the 2012 campaign, but it was about that.
Yeah, I think that was a huge component of the president's comments at the time, and that the way you just said, Brian, is perfect. We tend to use the word subsidy as a bad word, right, or a four-letter word, and in infrastructure and transportation in particular, that's not what a subsidy is at all. It's basically us saying, as a commons, right, we're going to pool our resources together to create this public good that we can all share and use. Now, we have to figure out how to ration it and whether or not we should price it. That's part of the reason you see so much congestion markets, is everyone can get on, let's say, the New Jersey Turnpike and drive on around a reasonable price. But in general, we're saying, look, this is a shared resource, and it's something that we can all benefit from, whether a private business to a nonprofit to just private households. It is that kind of shared component, and it's a great source of strength, both in the American economy today, even though we need a lot more infrastructure, but certainly how we built up ourselves throughout the 20th century too. It's a lot of shared investment that really was to a great aggregate benefit.
You know what? Somebody's calling in to defend Trump linking concern with infrastructure to debt restructuring in that clip. So let's take that call. Jake in Tribeca, you're on WNYC. Hi, Jake. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Brian. Well, I don't agree with Donald on most things. Having been a Wall Street person for 13 years and know all about interest rates, he is the only person who has touched on the subject of lowering interest rates, of using the lowest interest rates we've had in a very, very long time, as close to zero as we can get, to restructure our debt. This is a brilliant thing. This would put us in a much stronger financial situation. Why, the old story of buy low, sell high. Here you can buy the bonds at close to zero. And we've issued bonds over the decades when interest rates were high. This would help our economy tremendously.
But isn't it different in government than in business, especially the federal government? Because when a buyer buys a government bond, they're supposed to be 100% secure that they're going to get what they paid for in that government bond, which is supposed to be, very safe. I mean, I guess there are government junk bonds too, but generally considered, you get what you think you're paying for in that. So is there no risk to sort of the credibility of government bonds if you were to try to go in that direction?
My understanding is that a percentage of bonds have different features to them, so that some might have what we call features, so that the issuer, meaning the U.S. government, could call them back. I don't know what percentage those will be, but I would think a percentage are, and whatever can be done should be done.
Jake, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Well, we're just about out of time, but I'm just going to let you put your top, let's say, 3 infrastructure priorities on the table, if you think you could do it that way, Adi, because as I think we've established in this conversation, these days infrastructure means so many things. It's green, sustainable buildings, it's all the transportation infrastructure we think of first, it's wetlands to mitigate the effects of future storms, it's broadband, it's water pipes in Flint and everywhere else. So with it being so broad and with infrastructure being so expensive, which is such a big part of the conversation, what do you put first, second, and third?
such a fun question. Thank you. Also difficult, but this isn't necessarily in order, but looking at kind of my cheat sheet here for stats and what really pops to me, and things we're thinking about here at the Brookings Institution, I'd say kind of 1, 2, 3 is, first off is broadband, as I kind of pointed out. 1 in 4 Americans are not online. I mean, think about how many of us use e-commerce every day or telecommute. Let's say down here in DC, as we're having some pretty significant year-long metro construction, you're going to have the same in New York around the L train. So how can we make sure everyone's online, everyone has the digital skills to use online features, basically the internet, if you will? That's going to be really big for our competitiveness globally, especially as we're kind of on that advanced end of the spectrum.
Yeah, we've got
number 2.
30 seconds left, so let's do 2.
Yeah, sure. So really quick, make sure we clean up water across the country, including resiliency, not just clean drinking water and wastewater, and then really get smart about what kind of transportation we're building. So it can't just be highways out to nowhere anymore. I think we need to be smart about a multimodal approach, including things like the Gateway Tunnel that really are going to have broad-based benefits.
Katie Fuller is a Brookings Institution Fellow and member of the Metropolitan Infrastructure Initiative. You can see there is open posts for infrastructure issues at the brookings.edu website. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And that is issue 8 in our 30 Issues election series. Infrastructure as an issue in the New Jersey primary and the general election. Next week is issue 9, America's Place in the World. Brian Leonard and
WNYC salutes the arts. Join us in